Yeah, g'day, kia ora, Pastor Carl Bromley here in the deep south of New Zealand, and in this video I want to present to you a bit of a genealogical study of the history of man from the time of Noah and as it relates to modern day nations. It's just an overview, it's not really in depth, but something for you to think about and study more for yourself, but pretty clearly documented in history. Many of the issues we have today in terms of politics and understanding the politics around nations today comes from a failure to understand the history of the nations that present today and their claims. So let's just look at the genealogy here from the book of Genesis, from Noah's time, and make some observations about how that translates into modern day nations. Here you go, genealogy from Noah to the 12 patriarchs, Genesis 10 through 36. Of course, it starts with Noah, when God brought about the worldwide flood and destroyed the earth because of its violence and sin. And 8 people were saved through the ark by the grace and mercy of God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Japheth, and Ham. And through these three sons and their wives, God repopularized the earth after the flood. So first of all, let's follow the genealogy of Shem. So Shem had a son, Arphaxad, who had a son, Salah, had a son, Eber, had a son, Peleg, had a son, Ru, who had a son, Serug, had a son, Nahor, had a son, Terah, who had a son called Abraham. Now Abraham, yes, did marry his half-sister Sarah, and through them God begat the 12 nations of Arabia, or the Arab nations, via Hagar, who was Sarah's maidservant, because Sarah doubted the promise of God to bring a child through her. So she gave Abraham her maidservant Hagar to bring forth an offspring or an heir to Abraham. It was a rash decision, and both of them are guilty for going down that pathway, but it happened. And really Hagar was not in a position to really protest that too much, and she gave birth to Ishmael, the first son of Abraham. And of course, if you've read Genesis, you'll know that Sarah got pretty snotty about Hagar and Ishmael, because eventually after Sarah gave birth to Isaac, which we'll go there in a moment, she was upset at Ishmael apparently mocking Isaac, and she demanded that Abraham get rid of Hagar. And quite a sad story in a way. I have a lot of empathy for Hagar. She was cast out, but God, Jehovah El Roi, Yahweh El Roi, is God who sees, took mercy upon Hagar, beautiful story, and promised to bless Hagar and her son, and bless Abraham with a great nation coming through the loins of Ishmael, great nations. And from the loins of Ishmael, there were 12 tribes that were propagated and settled in the Middle East areas. And here's the names of them all here. I'm not going to name them all, but 12 Arab tribes through Ishmael. So through the promise of a son through the loins of Abraham and Sarah, Sarah did give birth then to Isaac. And Isaac and Rebekah gave birth to Jacob, whose name God changed to Israel. And Jacob, or Israel, gave birth also to 12 more descendants from the loins of Abraham, eventually. Excuse me. Through Leah, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, through Zilpah, Gad and Asher, through Bilhah, Dan and Naphtali, through Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin, the 12 patriarchs of Israel. So incredible. God blessed Abraham with 12 nations coming through Ishmael, the Arab nations, great and mighty nations of antiquity, and also 12 nations through Isaac, the son of promise, through Jacob, renamed Israel, as you've just seen. So that's the line through Shem, the Semitic line. And as someone rightly said, when you talk about Semitism, that line goes right through to the Arab nations as well as the Hebrew nations, which come to be known as the Jews. So Noah had a second son. Let's go to the third one for now. We'll go to the second one. Japheth. So Japheth is where the bloodline of the European nations came from. Gomer is thought to give birth and rise to European nations such as Germany, etc. Magog, Russia and early Germanic people, the Goths. Javan, European nations. Tarshish, they believe, Spanish. And also, haven't done much more research into this, but through this, the Romans and the British nations will come out of these bloodlines also. The third son's name was Ham. And Ham gave birth to Cush, Mizraim, Phut, and Canaan. Now, through Mizraim is an interesting genealogy here, because through him came Cushlehem, from where the Philistines descended. And the Philistines eventually made their way to the Middle East, to the area of the Middle East, which actually encompasses that strip of land up through the west coast of Israel, called Gaza, the West Bank, and up through there, Echelon and other places. But they came from Crete. They were the original Philistines. And they were driven out and destroyed. They don't exist anymore, actually. But this is an interesting note of history, that that's where the original Philistines came from. None of these Philistines had anything to do with the Arab nations that we saw came through Hagar and Ishmael. So the Arabs that settled into the region of the Middle East, now called today Palestine, have no relationship to the Philistines, who came through the descendants of Ham, not the descendants of Shem. So any claim today that says that the Arabs in the Middle East were Philistines or the original Palestinians is utterly incorrect, inaccurate, and false. It's proven very clearly by the genealogy of the scriptures and the genealogy of the Arabs themselves, who trace their descendants through Abraham, Shem, not through Ham, Mizraim, and Cushlehem. So when you know the history, and you do the history, it's all there for you to research, it clears up a few issues to do with the Middle East that we face today. Well, we go down through Ham's last descendant, Canaan. Through Canaan came all the nations of the Canaanites, Sidon and Heath, and all the Canaanites, including the Jebusites, all these Canaan nations that God promised Israel that he would drive from the land because of their sin and give Israel that promised land that he gave them. Now, the interesting about the Jebusites is that they were occupying Jerusalem at the time David's army took Jerusalem via Joab, David's general, and that city then was renamed Jerusalem. And Israel possessed that for 3,000 years, as God promised. The Jebusites themselves were not annihilated by Israel. In fact, Israel did not take out all the Canaanites as God instructed them to, but they become assimilated into the Israeli nation, but are not traceable today. However, it's interesting to note that King David did buy the threshing floor of Ornan from Ornan, who was a descendant of the Jebusites. He bought that threshing floor upon which an altar was built, and eventually upon which the temple was built. So, purchased from King David. It's the very place and position that now has the Dome of the Rock Mosque on it, where the first temple was originally. So you can see here from this overview, simple overview of genealogies from Noah to the 12 patriarchs, interesting historical manifestation of modern day nations, and in understanding this history, if people really understood this history, it would clear up a lot of the issues politically today in terms of the Middle East, and identify the inaccurate, incorrect and false claims made by some groups to broker power and possession of certain lands. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting. The history is there. You can Google it up. You can study it for yourself. Be careful with Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is only good as the information that's put into it. I've noticed already today in my study some false, inaccurate information in Wikipedia regarding Mount Zion and Jerusalem and Mount Moriah itself, which is another study. But I hope that's interesting to you and might spark some interest and answer some questions for you as well. And that is one of the reasons why the claim of modern day Arabs who came into the Middle East over the past couple of thousand years, since the majority of Israel was displaced in AD 70, the claims that they are the Philistines, they are the Palestinians, is false and inaccurate, because the original Philistines came from Crete. They were destroyed, actually. They don't exist anymore. And Israel itself had taken Jerusalem from the Jebusites, as God instructed, and was settled there for 3,000 years before being displaced by the hand of God, actually, in AD 70, to be regathered again in May 1948 as a fulfillment of God's promise to do so. So anyway, interesting stuff. Thanks for watching. God bless. Mā te wā. Bye for now. See ya.